How's it going, YouTube? Coaching today with another video, and today, guys, what we're going to do is the striker update for June. Now, this deck is constantly evolving, and the meta is constantly shifting, and we really have to make sure that we're prepared for that because of the way that the meta is going right now. We're seeing a lot less Despia and a lot more of the Rose Punk Synchro decks, and I really feel like there's going to be a vast difference in how we side. But we still have to respect that Despia is a bad matchup for us. And we'll talk about why that is. Today we'll talk about the different engines that are used in the deck, such as Therian and Adventurer. We'll go over my list and a couple different variations of the deck. Also, we'll talk about some of the new support, because I feel like there's a lot more implications of the newer support in November than a lot of people once thought. So I really am excited to go over that, though, because I used to think that cards like Linkage were pretty suboptimal for the deck. But now going back over and really looking at what the card can do for Striker, I think that is going to be really good. So we'll talk about why that is. If you haven't already checked out my sponsors, definitely go down in the description below to find the links for Imperium and Dragon Shield. And without further ado, let's go right on into the video today. So the first card that I want to mention is going to be Linkage. So Linkage is very strong, and I think that it's going to inevitably be a mandatory 3-of in the deck for a couple different reasons here. Now, one thing that I do want to mention is the initial thoughts of Linkage was the fact that this card could be OTK potential. That's almost never going to happen. You have to open up exactly Linkage, Ray, Rose to make it even work. And then your opponent also just has to have nothing on board and no hand traps. So don't really think about this card as an OTK card. Like, if it ever happens, then sure, you probably want to run Booster if you want that to happen. But at the same time, I think that this card has a lot of other application that I think is going to make it way better. To start, we're going to talk about the fact that the Therian package is nearly unplayable in Striker right now, because we already have a problem where you don't see Ray, you don't play the game. If you play Therian cards and you don't see Ray or Rose, you just bricked your hand out so much worse. And you have to play Prosperity just to be able to see both of them. And if you still don't, it's going to be a really rough time playing this deck, because the Therian cards are just innate bricks in the deck, and if you don't see Ray, it's going to be a very rough way to play around your opponent's board, especially if not everything in your hand can even be played. So I want to make sure that we all realize that when Linkage is here, this is going to make the Therian package very good. So make sure that you grab your Therian package whenever you find it for low, just because when Linkage comes out, these are cards we will see play. Just because of the fact that, again, we have more ways to see a starter, and there's more ways to get Links in the Grave to make your Regulus live. Also, I think that it's going to be very important with Linkage, because I don't even love playing 3 copies of Rose or 2 copies of Rose, just because of the fact that if you normal summon Rose, it can't tag out the same way that Ray can, right? So it's something that if you're playing against like Despia and they banish it, if you're playing against something that can just quick effect pop it, or like even ABC banish Rose, right? It's a really rough way to be able to try to play into a board. Whereas you have Linkage now, it gives you more ways to at least get something on the board. And it works a lot like Circle, where you can dodge things like Imperm and Veiler. So I just think that this card has a ton of potential. I think that this card is going to be, again, almost a mandatory 3-of. Definitely go ahead and start testing this now, but also go ahead and start grabbing the Therian packages, because I think that once this card gets in the game, it's going to make the Regulus package insane for the deck. But that's just the initial thoughts for now. This could change down the road, but I really do think that this has a lot of potential. Also, talking about bad matchups. So Despia is a little less in the format right now, but it's still something that we have to respect. It's still a deck that can put up a lot of a board, and it also can just have a lot of follow-up. So this is where, if you are siding to beat like Despia, even if you're going second against the deck, I highly recommend siding in D barrier, because you need a point in the game at which you can swing the tempo into your favor. So if you can turn skip your opponent after you break their board, sometimes that's just enough, because at that point you can at least get up in card advantage like a card or 2, and this is allowing you to just kind of really get in the driver's seat of the game and make sure that you can keep applying pressure. Because if you don't have a turn that you can essentially skip your opponents, like even after game 1, I usually side all copies of mine, but after just playing against a lot of Despia, I realized you have to keep at least 1 in, because even if you can just get a turn or 2 off of that mine, it just means so much of a difference, because you're allowed to just go so far advantage wise. Just being able to get to like a spell count, or being able to get to a specific card, or even just more of a hand, right? To be able to sculpt your hand out a little bit, and then clear it. Because after games 2 and 3, you got to know they have back route for you, so you need to clear your own mind at some point. You can't just keep it on the board. You can even droplet send it and negate a monster, which is something that a lot of people don't know that you can do. Mystic Mind only says they can't activate their effects. It doesn't say that they're negated. So you can droplet send your mind to the graveyard and negate their monsters, which is pretty cool. So that's another reason why I think that Droplet is a mandatory 3 of in the deck at all times. Card's just actually insane. But besides the Despia deck, I think that the Punk Synchro deck is starting to be a bit of an issue just because they can put up a lot of interruptions. They also can play through quite a bit, and then you have to worry about like the later game Punisher. So definitely just make sure that you're keeping all this in mind whenever you're playing against the deck, and we'll talk about that a bit more in the deck profile about like what kind of cards you can decide to really be able to answer this. So moving off of that though, shoutouts to Raymond Dye hitting up the top cut at the YCS using the Heed Soul package in Striker, utilizing the Brave engine as well, which was very good because of the fact that we didn't really have anything to use off of the Brave engine anymore because of No Verte. So being able to go into Link Spider, then go into Heat Soul after making the Space Insulator is very cool, and it's a really nice idea to be able to get free draws. I just want to make this apparent to anyone who hasn't already saw this yet, because I just think that it's a really cool idea, and that if you're trying to find a new way to play the deck, maybe you'll check out this variant. I'm personally not doing this, but I still think that it's pretty cool at least to say. Moving forward off of this though is going to be my list currently. So right now I'm main decking Ash Veiler. I have 3 Mystic Mind in my list. It's pretty standard, but I am main decking 3 Veiler, 3 Imperm, 3 Chalice, 3 Droplet. I think that effect negation this format alone is just the way to go. I think that it's really important that you have some form of effect negation. And even cards like Droplet are really nice too, for a couple different reasons. And one thing that I really want to point out too, like I was talking about the Punisher, is that if you get a Punisher dropped on you late game, the only way that you're really going to be able to out it is swinging into it and then making sure that your life goes lower and then going to like Kagari and adding back like an Anchor or a Burner to go ahead and kill it. So this is going to be one of your only ways if you're not playing like Kaijus or anything. But I think that cards like Droplet are just still very important. Being able to, again, clear your own mind, being able to get the spell count Engrave when you only have 2, which is really nice. Honestly, that comes up for me way more than anything else. Effect negation this format, especially if you're playing against like Fluandaries, comes up a ton. Like at the last regional I just played at this weekend, I versed 3 Fluandaries in a row, and I beat all 3. And that's just because playing so many effect negations. It also gave me enough grind game against like the Punk Therian and the Punk Synchro decks, because against Despia, you already have like the main deck of the Mystic Mind. Of course, you're playing like Ash and the Shark Cannons too to answer the Banishments and the Brandon and Reds. So the list itself is already performing pretty well. Also in the sideboard, I would always recommend right now just siding 3 Zombie World, because the Fluandaries matchup is so prevalent that if you have that card, you just instant win that matchup. And that's something that I just highly recommend to at least think about, because that matchup is already pretty tough. So I really like respecting that matchup more right now than even thinking about cutting cards like Token Collector, because against Sword Soul, you already play so many cards that really answer that deck, and you also have like Nibiru and D-Barrier. So I think that you don't really need the Token Collector, especially because a lot of the players who are on Sword Soul right now just realize that card's really in the format, and so there's a lot of really nice ways you can play around it. So if anything, I think the siding of the deck will end up changing, and we'll see a lot less of like Token Collector and hopefully more like Zombie World and like the Striker side. It won me like 4 matchups at the regional too, which was really cool. I just think that has a lot of very good generic usage, and I think that we'll be seeing that card for a little while longer. The other variant of the deck is playing the Drolls instead of Mystic Mine, because a lot of people are prepared for Mystic Mine right now, and main decking Droll also helps you deal with the Punk Therian, Punk Synchro decks, even the ABC deck. So I think this was really nice too, to be able to have that in the main deck to, again, get that turn skip that really does swing that tempo into your favor to really allow you to win those matchups that might seem a little bit harder than others. But the last way that I really want to talk about here is going to be main decking a copy of Booster. Just 2 copies of mine, not really focusing on mine here. But I think that the most optimal way right now to run the extra deck in Striker, from all of my playtesting and everything that I've seen in this format, is going to be playing the Hulk Selene, but also playing the Dark and Unicorn. And this is something that I've said for a long time, was that I really never liked the Hulk and the Selene because it's too hand trappable, especially when everyone's on hand traps, you just kind of lose to like a Veiler, right? But at the same time, if you're allowed to play the way that I like to play the deck with Dark and Unicorn to be able to play through Interruption, and you can also have the ability to go Hulk Selene, I think that's way more prevalent. if you really want to play like the second Zeke, you really don't need to play Kaina anymore either. So like you can just make that decision as well. But I think just having the ability to go into the fast OTK, main decking the booster, and then also having the way to break the board is actually just a really nice way to make sure that the deck stays as versatile as we know the deck to be. Also, you can even consider cutting cards like the Mystic Mine in the main deck, and even like the Cosmics, and you can just main deck a copy of like Upstart and Triple Drill as well. So that's something else that you can consider. I really like main decking Cosmic just because there's so many different decks out there that can have cards like Skill Drain, even when whenever you're playing against like the Eldritch decks, or if you're playing against like Despia, you can also force out like a Branded and Red earlier, just to make sure that your Rose doesn't get interacted with on summon if you have something to blink the board with, right? So there's a couple different ways that you can run the deck, but I think that so far the most optimal list for me is going to end up being this one here, because playing Hulk Lane together with the Dark and Unicorn to be able to smash the board and then get to the OTK whenever it's at like an awkward game state, I think has been the best for me so far. So let me know what you guys think about the list down in the comments below, because I think that effect negation in this format is actually super important. But I hope that you enjoyed today's video, and if you haven't already joined my Discord, Twitch, Twitter communities, definitely go ahead and check them down in the links in the description below. Also, if you need a session over at Metafy, definitely go ahead and message me on Discord if you have any questions about it. Otherwise, sign up and I'll see you there. Everyone have a great night, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks.